Good morning.
Good morning.
So, my name is Ina McBride, and I'm your worship associate this morning, and part of the team that is working to bring this service to you wherever you may be. We welcome you to our worship service this morning. We're so glad you're with us today, whether you're joining us for the first time, if you're in person or virtually, or whether you're here for longer than you can remember. Here at Community, we welcome people of all faiths and of no faith in particular. Whoever you are, wherever you are on your journey, you are welcome here. Today, we are privileged to have with us our guest speaker, Rosie Curts. Rosie is a Dallas native and a high school math teacher in Dallas ISD. She is an active member of her union, the American Federation of Teachers, AFT Local 2260, an executive board member and delegate from her union to the Dallas AFL-CIO Central Labor Council, and the co-chair of the DFW chapter of Young Active Labor Leaders. She's not busy at all, you can tell. She is the proud aunt of Asa and Lucy. Please welcome our guest speaker, Rosie Curts.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So my name is Rosie, and I'm very excited and honored to be asked to speak to you today, and mostly about the labor movement and the status of labor in our country now, and how I became involved in the labor movement and what inspires me to continue that work, and why I think everyone should care about the labor movement. So just so you know me a little bit, I was born and raised in Dallas. In various fields of activism, you're often told to talk about your personal story regarding your political awakening, and I've heard a lot of really good stories over the years about people's particular crises or revelations that caused them to become activists. But I don't have any good story like that. I can only say that I was raised right. So to give you an idea of the kind of household I grew up in, I can tell you that my mom has a file of pictures she's taken of my sister and I at various anti-war protests since we were toddlers, because she saved them as we were growing up so that in the unlikely off chance that women were ever subject to a military draft, we could prove a lifetime of conscientious objection. So I've been consciously and proactively involved in politics since I was about 9 years old, but I didn't really think twice about unions or labor until I became a teacher, because I generally knew that unions were good, but I think part of the reason it took me a while to reach the labor movement is because, particularly in Texas, no one talked about it anymore. Unions felt like relics of the past. The idea of unions made you think maybe of Cesar Chavez and the farm workers, and it was more like a legend, and sometimes that felt like intentional erasure. It's often the case that people don't become attuned to a political issue until it impacts them personally. We're generally speaking as humans most inspired to action by things that directly affect us. And I think that's also why so many people don't vote, because they don't fully see or understand yet how election results impact their day-to-day life. So I was really interested in politics, but then I went to college and got the most apolitical degree ever in mathematics. And I became a math teacher, and I joined the Teachers Union, American Federation of Teachers, right away, because I knew that unions were good. But then I promptly forgot about it and went on to focus on my first year teaching. But my brother-in-law is also a teacher, and he started getting more active in the union, and so he recruited me during my second year teaching to give a speech at the monthly school board meeting as part of a campaign for a raise for support staff. And I spoke about the longtime teacher's assistant that worked in my room during my first year, and how I couldn't have done it without her, and how much she taught me about classroom management. And then we won that raise for support staff, and it really got me hooked on union activism, and I've only never been able to look back from that. So to explain why I think I've really found my place and why I think it's a great place for everyone, I want to start by giving you a second to consider the question, who is the working class? And who do you think of when you hear the term working class? I'm a teacher, so I give wait time. Pause. Not asking for people to speak out loud, but just think for a second.
I have an idea.
Okay.
Anyone who works for a paycheck.
Well, spoiler, so a lot of the time, I think people think of factory workers on an assembly line or service industry workers, and we think of people who might be financially struggling and people who live paycheck to paycheck, but we're going to broaden that definition to anyone who works for a living or had to work for a living until a normal retirement age. They're working class, and that probably means that you're working class. It doesn't mean you have to live paycheck to paycheck. And it doesn't mean you have to work on a factory floor or wait tables. It means that you can't afford to live indefinitely off a trust fund or stock dividends, that you need a job. And working class just means that you work. Yeah. So, in other words, almost all of us are working class, except for the most elite. And I think once we realize that the struggles of the working class are the struggles of us all, that we are strongest when we focus on our similarities and stand in solidarity with each other. The labor movement can truly unite an overwhelming number of people. And that doesn't mean that those of us that have the privilege of living with financial security shouldn't acknowledge that privilege, but we should feel a responsibility towards our working class siblings of all income levels, because ultimately we all get a huge portion of our time taken up with our need to work. So we are in similar boats. And there's so many causes that are worthy of our time, and my speech today shouldn't be taken to mean that I am dismissive of any other political, social issues that incredible activists donate their time and energy to and money. And I can't work on every issue. None of us can. So it's good for us to have different priorities so that every issue gets attention. But my reason for choosing the labor movement as my issue is because it feels like the best way for me to impact the greatest number of people in the biggest way. Because we spend so much of our lives at work. And when we are not at work, we are commuting to and from work, we are thinking about work, we are making plans around work, we are figuring out what we can afford for the rest of our lives based on how much we're making at work, trying to calculate how long we have to work. So working conditions and income dramatically impact every working class person every day. Impacting working conditions changes everything for a person. I'm sure everyone can relate, for example, to a job that might have been miserable if you hadn't had wonderful coworkers that you bond with. When people ask me how my year is going, how teaching is going, my usual response is something like, I love being with the kids, I just wish all the adults would leave me alone. A bad boss or a bad schedule, dangerous working conditions, nonsensical rules that you have to follow, and these things wear you down, especially when they're relentless and it's continuing indefinitely and you're thinking, I'm gonna have to be doing this for another 30 years. They start impacting you outside the workplace as well. It saps you of your energy that you could spend on your family and your social life and your regular adulting responsibilities and your passions. But trying to fix every workplace one at a time is impossible for a well-intentioned person who wants to help. And that's why the labor movement is so important. Right now, charity work is crucial. So this gets to what's in my blurb. Our current economic system and government doesn't meet the needs as it should for our citizens. And we can't tell someone who's hungry or homeless today that they need to wait until we have an economic revolution. We need to give them food now. But it's just as crucial to not get hung up thinking that charity is a solution. It's a Band-Aid, and it's a necessary evil, and devoting just time to charity is a good way to burn out, because there's always more people in need. So we, as working class people, we can't wait for anyone to come save us. Not only is it not possible for one person or even one well-meaning organization to save us, but it also isn't a long-term solution. We need to save ourselves, and that means empowerment. That is what activism in the labor movement is about. That is what we can all do. We can throw our efforts into helping workers feel empowered to fight for change themselves. And I'm going to break that down to 3 parts. First, we need to listen to workers. The employees of a workplace know best what they need most. I may be biased, but I think public education is one of the most clear examples of this. We have countless private nonprofits intended to support students and teachers and to improve public education in a myriad of ways, but very rarely, if ever, do these organizations consult with the teacher unions, who would clearly be in the best position to collect and offer a broad variety of opinions from teachers and support staff on the biggest problems facing our kids today. We see this in the legislature and in our school board elections. They're not listening. And after you listen to the workers and find out what they need, the next step would be making sure that workers are legally capable of fighting for what they need. Sometimes workers feeling empowered isn't enough if there's still a lot of restrictions on what they're legally allowed to do. So again, for me, every 2 years the legislature meets, or all year in this case, they discuss raises, they fight for raises for teachers, and, they're fighting about funding and teacher raises and vouchers now. And, I would love a raise. I want them to pass a raise for me and more education funding. But we wouldn't have to have this fight every 2 years if we spent one session on getting teachers collective bargaining and strike rights. Then we could fight our own battles, right? And so that's the empowerment I'm looking for. I mentioned in my intro, it's how it seemed like unions are forgotten. It feels that way particularly during political campaigns too. Every candidate's website will have their position on abortion and property taxes and immigration and gun control and education funding. And those are all really important, and I want to know those positions. But when was the last time you saw a candidate who had a section laying out their platform on labor rights? That's why we don't see a legislative fight for collective bargaining for teachers. I think a lot of politicians, if you ask them if you supported it, they'd be like, yeah, of course. But it's never something that people are willing to be proactive about getting on the floor. My parents live in Congressional District 32, which is the seat that Colin Allred is vacating. And so there's like a dozen odd candidates running for that seat. And I checked all their websites thinking about this, and I found one that mentioned unions on their website out of all of them. And I'm not going to say who it is because I don't want it to be considered an endorsement. I haven't looked at everybody yet. But so one thing you can do is ask questions as this election cycle ramps up. If there's a meet the candidate event, ask what they think needs to be done to empower unions. Empower workers. And don't ask how they can help workers, because that's when they'll talk about what they can do. We want to ask them how they can help workers to help themselves. I want candidates to feel the pressure that they have to know what they're talking about and they have to have a labor platform. So walking through the perfect scenario, we've listened to the workers, we know what they need, we know what they want, we're lobbying the legislature for union and worker rights so they can fight for what they need throughout all this. Now, let's say that the workers in a workplace are already in that fight. Sometimes it's through a union that already exists. Sometimes they're fighting to unionize. And the next thing they need, the third part, is unequivocal solidarity from their community. So one thing that I'm really passionate about, of course, is to never, ever, ever cross a picket line. And the way I like to compare it that I think gets through to a lot of people is comparing to people that say my vote doesn't matter. I'm not going to bother voting because I'm just one person. It doesn't matter. This past week, there were 3 Starbuckses in DFW that were on strike for Red Cup Rebellion Day. And you can imagine someone coming up to get their morning coffee, and they really want coffee, and they're like, oh, good job, you guys, but I'm just going to get my coffee real quick. But hold on, And they say, I support it, and they'll think, oh, it's just one latte, I can still support them, it's just one. But every time you do that, every time you cross a picket line, then that's a vote. You're voting, you're saying, my vote doesn't matter, I'm going to go with what I want and the bosses and not support the workers. So one story I like to tell is about a year ago, the staff of Alamo Draft House in Lake Highlands was trying to unionize. And then one of their lead organizers was unjustly fired. And so they did a walkout. They did a strike one night. And I was at that picket line with them. And they weren't necessarily trying to tell people not to go to the movie. They were just handing out information and everything and making sure people knew about the issues. But there was one woman that came up to the front and was just like, whoa, what's going on here? And they told her, and she was like, I'm going to get my money back. And she called her friend and said, we're not going to the movie tonight. And she went in and got a refund. And she was like, I'm not going to go into the movie theater if they're doing that. And I remember that these young people that were striking, and a lot of them in their early 20s, that was just such a morale booster to see someone who was like ready to stand in solidarity with them and change their plans rather than cross the picket line. And that's so meaningful to see that support. So now we know what we need to do to help the greatest number of people in the greatest ways. If I had a teacher whiteboard, I like steps because I'm a math teacher. So number 1 is listen to the workers. Number 2 is fight to empower them legally through pressure on elected politicians. And number 3 is stand in solidarity when they fight. Okay. So what's going on in labor today? Thankfully, unions aren't feeling so forgotten anymore. But sometimes I'm not sure whether that's more people paying attention to unions or if it's just that I primarily surround myself with people that pay attention to unions. But according to the polls, 71% of people support unions and 88% of people under 30 support unions. People interested in activism and interested in growing the progressive movement, interested in getting young people involved, they continue to ignore unions at their peril because the Starbucks baristas I know are in their 20s and they are killing it, and labor is what they're interested in. Labor is what drives them. Young people these days don't feel particularly loyal to any political party. They don't feel the same sense of civic duty to vote if you don't give them something to vote for. They're kind of done voting out of fear of the alternative. They're not scared anymore. We're angry, right? And we want to vote for someone who fights for us. So candidates that want to have young people support, they got to give them something to vote for, not just someone to vote against. Last time I talked to the church, I was telling them about how we had these big strikes going on, UAW and SAG-AFTRA and WGA, and it felt really good as I was preparing for this to look back and say, oh, we won all those strikes. They're over. We won. But we can't let our guard down, of course. And I'm going to close a couple things. First off, part of the reason we can't let our guard down, my favorite quote that I think relates to labor is by Frederick Douglass. And he said, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found out the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them. And these will continue till they are resisted with either words or blows or with both. I think that sums up the labor movement. So, in conclusion, imagine the worst job you've had in your life. Think about why you had to get that job, how long you had to stay there and put up with it, how hard it was to get out, or how inconvenient it was to quit. Now imagine if you were in that same situation, but now you and all your colleagues had each other's backs, and you were legally able to demand change without just getting fired, and you were able, instead of just leaving, to change your workplace into a place where for 40 hours a week, you felt strong and empowered instead of helpless and beat down. What a huge difference that would make. We spend way too much time at work. Too many people spend way too much time at work for it to be a place where we leave our power at the door. It's a sacrifice that we simply can't make. Thank you.